related to travel, as you know, it is a very big uh, item, particularly for the consulting world. People, even for people not in consulting world, in US, Europe, it's quite common that people travel from from their place of residence to their workplace for a week and then come back by the weekend, right? So every week they are taking up expenses. Every week they are taking up travel. They have expenses around hotels, food, car rentals, and so on and so forth. So recurring expenses, weekly expenses are there. Besides one-off expenses like maybe internet charges reimbursement or phone charges reimbursement, or work from home. Some companies give reimbursements for people working from home and those sort of things which have to be claimed on their expenses part. So as far as expenses goes, there are two parts to it. There are two parts to it. One part is the employees generating the expenses and submitting it for reimbursement. The second part is there is an expenses audit team, such as they call it audit. Basically, it's the finance team which checks whether all the expenses are correctly done. You can have policies defined to say what will be reimbursed and what will not be reimbursed. Then you could have receipts, whether receipts have been attached or not. Let me just quickly put them on a slide so that is the instance up. I put in the URL and it failed, so I don't know if the instance is up. Looks like the instance is down. Okay. So here, when we look at the expenses, there are two parts to it. One is the employee side and one is the admin side. Admin is basically your employee side and your finance or admin side. employee will fill expense template. Submit expenses. Make changes to expenses. Make changes to. These are called expense report. Okay. So what expenses you're making? This is the typical term used in. Originally, it came up from US only, expense report. So this has been continuing ever since. Make changes as requested by admin. Submit receipts or so people who are traveling, who are you know the consultants, salespeople. So what they do, you must be aware that they put it in a packet and then email it, then send it through courier over to a dedicated office, which is exclusively or a dedicated mailbox where all expense receipts are submitted. Okay. And what is the role of the finance or the admin side? They will review the expenses submitted, approve the expenses for payment, identify policy violations, and oh, yeah. Hi, Santosh. What
Hi, sorry, sorry.
what happened? You had dropped off.
No, nothing. I was connected to phone, then I use my system now.
Oh, okay. Is the application running from your side, Santosh
No.
or Rakesh?
Yesterday it was running. Let me check now.
Yeah, yesterday night also I was able to log in. Right now it is giving me an error. So create.
No, it's not working.
It's not working. Huh? Okay, okay. I thought maybe it's just me.
No, not working.
Okay. So create a list of oddities. So you could have, like, a list of employees for whom the expenses will be audited. It could be that you have, over the years or over the few months or weeks, you have identified certain people who have uh, been repeatedly making uh, making incorrect claims. Okay, as there have been policy deviations, there are wrong claims, people are claiming more than they're supposed to, and stuff like that. In that case, you can create a list of auditees. So whenever they submit an expense, it will go for audit. For everybody else, it could go for auto approval. Are you following it? So what happens? It speeds up the process of expense reimbursement. So suppose you have 1,000 people in your company. For 975 people, you could just set it to auto approval. Only 25 people you want to review. Okay, or you want your finance or admin team to review. So the process here is, for expenses, employee submits, manager approves, finance approves, or finance or admin or the auditor approves, and it goes for payment. Okay, so the process is, employee submits, manager approves, finance approves. Now this finance approves, it can be in sequence or it can be in parallel. Okay, so you could have that it will go parallelly to finance and manager. So who, if one of them approves that, that's good enough, or either of them may be using it. And this one, expenses are ultimately paid through payables. Okay, so once finance approves, it will become, it will get created as a invoice in payables, paid through payables. Okay,
So accounting lines are generated only after it goes to payable, right? When the as a supply.
correct.
Expense does not have any accounting line generated.
Within expenses, it's recorded, because you know
But
whether it's food, whether it
yeah,
is
but it's recorded, but
airfare.
it doesn't have any subledger transaction, something like that, right?
Correct, correct. So we pass it through the payables, then an invoice gets created, and that is when this is recognized as a expense. All right. Now, when an employee is submitting it, we call it an expense template. Basically, what it means is you could have template as a collection of items. For example, we know when people are traveling, there is airfare, there is food, there is local travel. In case of US, you will have car rentals. In India, you could have local travels, like maybe, you know, you will have a car which is being taken on rent, hire. You know, moment a salesperson lands at a location, he will have to immediately start. He takes a car on hire and goes around and then comes back. Okay. So in this way, sorry, what happened? Oh, this no. Okay. So let's take a quick look at how the expenses are submitted. Okay. And when we look at in the application, employee, he logs in through his ID. Finance will need a responsibility, a role to be able to review and audit. Okay. Separate role gives access to audit tasks. Separate role gives access to. They are calling it audit, but usually in our day-to-day accounting world, audit is like a separate activity in itself. So we can call it finance or admin. Gives access to admin, finance person. Raise and submit reports. Okay. Now let's take a look. See, there is a on this expense work area, there is a video here. You watch video. Let me just make the sound loud. One. Could you hear it?
Hi, my name is Dee. In this tutorial, I'll show you around the expenses work area and how to create an expense report. Let's begin by navigating to the product tour page. You'll come to this page first if no expense transactions have been created. From here, you can watch a training video, create an expense report or expense items, and learn about your corporate policies. Now, let's navigate to the travel and expenses work area. At the top of the page, we see 6 info tiles. Each one has a different heading and purpose. The expense items and expense reports info tiles are available to everyone. The approvals info tile is used by managers who can approve expense reports. The cash advances info tile shows requests for cash advances. If you submitted a request to approve estimated expenses for a future activity, then you can use the authorizations info tile. And the trips info tile is present if travel is enabled and you booked a trip. Now, let's check out the Actions menu. Here, we can specify whether to create an expense item, create an expense report, request a cash advance, request an authorization, book travel, create expense items in a spreadsheet, or tour expenses. Actions that appear on this list are based on configuration. Performance of these tasks is independent of actions taken with info tiles. Now, let's create an expense report. We'll start by entering the purpose of the report and then save it. After saving the report, Expenses assigns a report number. Next, we can itemize the expenses we incurred on our last business trip. We'll select the travel template and the hotel expense type. Based on expenses setup, hotel is an expense that we can itemize. Notice that the itemization section appears after we enter the expense type.
Itemization means day-wise breakup. Like hotel, every day you can break it up.
Enter all of the required fields, including expense location and amount. And we'll also add a description and merchant name. Now we'll add our itemized lines. For the room charge, we'll quickly attach the receipt by dragging it from our hard drive to this location. I added the rest of my itemized lines. Notice that we've specified the phone calls as personal expenses by selecting the personal option. After completing our itemizations, we see the remaining business balance is $0 for the hotel itemization and $20 for personal phone calls. Now we'll add our airfare. As with the hotel, we'll start by creating an item. We enter data for the fields we need and then create another item for our taxi expense. With our taxi expense complete, our expense report contains 3 expense items. Let's look at a couple of handy features. If we want to take an action on a specific expense item, we can select the applicable checkbox and click Actions. Or, if we want to select all the checkboxes, we can select the top one. 2 additional conveniences include sorting data in ascending or descending order by clicking an up or down arrow, and clicking into the description field to add information. We can complete the expense report by adding attachments. Our new expense report is now complete. We can submit it for approval. But first, let's indicate that we've read and accepted the corporate travel and expense policies. And we're done. Thank you for watching.
I think you got a feel of how the expenses are generated. And as we don't have the system right now, we will have to look at a couple of videos for now, and then we can. This is about the spend authorization.
Hello, my name is Tanya. In this tutorial, we'll submit a spend authorization for an upcoming trip. Then we'll create a report and attach the approved authorization to an expense. Let's start on the Travel and Expenses work area. Here we see info tiles which represent transactions and expenses. Today we'll first request an authorization. From the Actions menu, let's select the Request Authorization option. A spend authorization is a request for anticipated expenses. We'll enter the purpose of the upcoming trip, the expense location, and the start and end dates. Let's estimate the expenses for the trip. Let's select the travel template and complete the estimated airfare expense. You can select the functional currency or the currency of your destination country. I finished entering my airfare information, so I'll save and enter my next expense. The final estimated expense is for hotel accommodations. We'll enter the expense type, the amount, and a description. The completed spend authorization has an authorization number, estimated expenses, and an estimated total. This looks complete, so we're ready to submit it to the manager.
So now the manager is logging in.
Now I'm logged in as a user with the manager role. I'll click the bell to view notifications that require action by the manager. Look, here's the approval request. We can see the total amount requested, the employee who requested approval, the spend authorization number and submission date, the purpose of the spend authorization, the date range and location of the anticipated expenses, and the items section. Since everything looks in order, let's approve it. I'll add comments, then submit and approve the spend authorization. Now I'm logged back in as the employee. The approved authorization is in the work area. We'll also receive a notification from the manager saying that the notification was approved. The trip's over, so let's create an expense report now. Let's enter the purpose and then save the expense report. Let's add expense items to the report. First, we'll create the airfare expense item.
You see they are choosing the template.
Now let's search for the estimated airfare expense. We can attach it to the actual expense item. The final expense item to create is for the hotel. Since the hotel expense item is itemized, we need to complete the mandatory fields in the itemization section. I'll search for and then attach the hotel authorization. Before we submit the report, we must acknowledge that we've read and accepted the company's travel and expense policies. Tutorial will submit a spend authorization for an
Noticed here, when they submitted this authorization, it was an online. So from the online itself, they could pick it up, quite like
and attach the hotel authorization.
from the list.
Before we submit the report, we must acknowledge that we've read and accepted the company's travel and expense policies. It's ready for approval. Thanks for watching.
Okay. Next one is the
Hello, my name is Barbara. In this tutorial, I'll show you how to manage trip expense reports. Let's begin by navigating to the Travel and Expenses work area. The Trips info tile is visible only when Expenses is integrated with GetThere, our corporate travel partner. Integration means the travel feature is enabled, an employee has booked a trip, and the itinerary has been imported into Expenses from GetThere. If we click the Canceled link, we'll only see the canceled trips displayed. If we click the Booked link, we'll see the bookings. By default, Expenses creates a name for each trip, but you can change it. Trips also show start and end dates and the type of reservations booked. When we book travel, we're launched into GetThere. After signing in to GetThere, we can immediately book travel or review previous bookings. Now let's look at the trips we've already booked. A trip is a collection of booked reservations. To see our itineraries and expenses, the travel administrator runs a process to import our bookings from GetThere. Let's look at the itinerary for the Ithaca trip. The itinerary details we see are the same reservations that were booked in GetThere. If we want to change our trip, we make the changes in GetThere, and then the itinerary is imported again. Employees don't always book their airfare, accommodations, and car rental at the same time. Conveniently, employees can consolidate separately booked reservations into one by using the Add Travel Items to Trip button. After we take our trip, we can automatically create an expense report from the trip. The trip expense report selects all eligible corporate card transactions within the date range of the trip. If corporate cards are not used by employees, the trip expense report creates cash expense lines for dates and amounts found in the itinerary. Here's the expense report that was created from the trip. For each expense, we can see all the details. Before submitting, we need to indicate that we've read and accept the travel and expense policies. Now, let's submit the report. Oh, we have some missing receipts. Well, we can still submit the report now and attach or email the missing receipts later. There's the trip expense report we just created. Bon voyage!
see any videos for expense reimbursements for admin person being able to go in and see it. So till the system is back, we won't be able to see that. expenses, we saw all three of them. There is, from a setup perspective, we have to define the policies, we have to define the expense template that needs to be, that can be used, and the different levels of, whether we want parallel or, we want sequential processing. Nothing is there. Don't think there's any other instance also. Let me just check with Bhaskar if he has any other instance. Do you have any other instance? This ADC2 one is down. Okay, okay. We can take a 5 minutes break. Bhaskar is just checking it. Okay. Otherwise, he will share a new one.
Okay, sir.
I'll pause the recording also.